right. I just want to welcome all of you to our data-driven decisions webinar today, and we'll be doing our own Q&A to ask questions, and hopefully we'll get to all of your questions. If any questions we aren't able to get to, we'll be following up with a recap of all of this at the end. Our agenda that we're going to focus on today is data, KPIs, profit, and a little bit of maybe your year-end strategy. My name is Abby Honecker, and I am president of partner success at Pink Sky. Essentially, I help med spas and wellness practices scale smart, build profitable systems, and create patient experiences that actually work. And I'm going to admit that the three of us here, Nick, Ben, and myself, we're a little bit of number nerds. We love spreadsheets. We love clean data decisions that are based on reality, guys, and not guesswork. And so the two experts joining me today, Ben Wolber, he's the founder and CEO of InsightX. He turns chaotic med spa data into clear, actionable insights owners can actually use. We have Nick Ligori, his CPA and founder of Ligori Accounting, specializing in tax-efficient, financially sound med spa operations. So, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you instead of me reading some long bio. And honestly, I'd like to hear from both of you. I want you to share your origin story. You know, how did you become an industry leader in these data-driven decisions? So, Ben, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. So quick background on me, like Abby mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of InsightX. Before this, I spent years in finance and healthcare analytics, so mostly working with hospitals, really helping them understand their KPIs and uncover operational and financial issues. And really one pattern I kept seeing was that med spas were growing quickly and had more data than ever, but didn't have a simple way to turn it into clear decisions. And that's really why we built InsightX, was to give owners a straightforward, practical view of what's working, what's not, and really what actions will actually move towards profit. So really excited to dive into that today.
And Nick, tell us your origin story.
So yeah, Nick Ligori, I'm owner and founder of Ligori Accounting. We're an outsourced accounting CPA firm that specializes in the medical aesthetics industry. So we work with med spas across the country, providing outsourced accounting, bookkeeping, fractional CFO, and tax services. So I've started my firm in 2020. I have a mixed background in both public accounting and private industry. But my passion really is working with small businesses and small business owners. So taking that experience and expertise, I started my practice. And a couple of years in, found myself in the niche of working with med spas. One of my earliest clients was a local med spa. And working with them was great in terms of it was a good fit for services we were providing and what their financial needs were from an accounting and tax perspective. And we got more involved with the industry, with AmSpa, with other organizations locally. We're based out of New Hampshire, and we joined the New Hampshire AmpNH organization, which is an association for medical aesthetics practices here in New Hampshire. And things have just progressed from there. So we again work with med spas specifically, and help them understand their numbers, their data, and plan effectively, efficiently from a tax and accounting standpoint.
All right. Well, I'm excited to jump in today. And honestly, guys, today we just want to cut through the noise. Why do KPIs matter? What are those red flags to watch for? And what should everyone on here and our industry leaders as well do before year end? Okay, so I'm going to start with our first question, and that is going to be, what are the biggest challenges that you see the med spas are going to face when trying to make these data-driven decisions? I'm going to throw it to you, Ben, first.
Cool. Yeah. So what I've noticed is most med spas don't really have a data problem. They usually have a data overload problem. So think your booking system, your payment systems, your marketing platforms, and your EMR systems all live in different silos. So nothing's really talking to each other. And then that leads to owners ending up guessing on what insights matter and really guessing on drawing to those types of conclusions. And that's why I really like platforms like a Boulevard. They've done a really good job at making the client experience seamless and putting a lot of their operational data into one place. So it actually removes a ton of chaos and gives owners clarity instead of like 20 different open tabs.
When there's a lot of information and you're just throwing stuff at the board, I see this with clients. There's also that overwhelm of just like there's no follow through, there's no auditing, there's no accountability with it, right? They grab the numbers and they don't actually know what to do with them, right? It doesn't translate into action. I know you've worked with hundreds of practices, so. Nick, do you have anything you'd like to add to that as far as like what the biggest challenges are that you see?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's often the issue is just there's too much data and the struggle is interpreting it. And from our point of view, I'll add in QuickBooks or whatever your accounting system is. So you have your EMR data, your actual operations data, but then you have your financial data. And how do you utilize that data to make business decisions from it? I think that's the issue. And it's like everyone wants to have that insight into what these numbers mean. Usually, like you said, Ben, if you're working in a system like Boulevard or an EMR that provides you a lot of reports or data, that's great, but it's now how do you use it and how do you connect that to your financial outcomes that you're getting from your P&L and financial statements?
And also making sure that EMR is optimized, right, Ben? That you're using your EMR properly. A good EMR is really important. Okay, back to you, right, Nick. What are those must-have KPIs that we should be tracking daily, weekly? You know what? I mean, obviously, you have some favorites. Share those with us.
Yeah, so there's two sides of it for me. One is like on the financial side. So I always like to say what looking at gross profit percentage is the big one. So what's your gross profit margin? And we look at that with our clients at least on a monthly basis. The other keys are what's your percent of payroll percentage, what's your marketing percentage spend, and what's your cost of goods sold. Like those are the big ones we're looking at from a big picture on the financial statements. And then KPIs, revenue per provider is an important KPI to look at. Utilization is another huge one that we will always want to be monitoring. And then, revenue per hour or like average ticket price as or a couple other big ones that we like to are good indicators to be tracking.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Ben, like from an analytics view, what is your like key KPI that you're looking at?
Yeah, so from my perspective, weekly KPIs should be simple and actionable. And really our core like six are new patients, return visit rate, consult to conversion, average revenue per visit, utilization, like Nick mentioned, and then cost per booked visit. Our thought is if a metric doesn't help you make a staffing, scheduling, or a marketing decision that week, it probably doesn't belong in like a weekly meeting. But again, that's just our personal opinion.
Yeah, I know from my perspective, right? Like you guys gather the information for me and then I take it and we make it matter within the clinic by follow through and auditing it and then putting it in front of people to track it daily to make sure that we hit our revenue goals at the end of the month. So what you two do and the numbers that you're tracking are really beneficial in driving that revenue, right?
Yeah.
So which KPI reveals the fastest problem when you're looking at analyzing a practice, right? What is your fastest red flag KPI that when you see, you need to jump into action? Let's go, Ben.
I'll probably have a different opinion than Nick, but mine would be return visit rate. So for us, it's like if that dips.
That's mine too, Ben. That's mine too. So we're
Say,
right there.
If that dips, something is breaking. Like whether that's the experience, the treatment plan, the pricing, or even like the simple follow up. It's one of the earliest signs from our perspective that something operational needs like your all's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I agree with you. That's super important. The other one I would add to that is utilization rate. I think that's a good indicator from a profitability standpoint. Like if your utilization is too low, that gives you a couple of good indicators of I'm either overstaffed or, there's another reason we're not filling the pipeline and filling our team's schedule. So like what's the underlying cause of that that number itself is a good indicator especially if it starts to decline or isn't growing at the rate you want it to. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
I'll give you one better. Both of you are right. I like to look at rebooking and utilization together to do my formula to find out what my room rate per hour is. This is what it costs me when that room sits empty. This is what my minimum invoice spend needs to be per provider, so I can break that down and really work to train and guide my providers when I know what their minimum invoice spend is. If I'm looking at a minimum invoice spend of like $500 per hour, and their percentage of treatment, the highest revenue is $90 per hour. Well, now we've got a big problem, right, Nick?
Yeah.
We're upside down a little bit in that. So I'm going to go with both of you are right, and I like it. Action, rebooking, and utilization. What's our most ignored KPI that you think that most med spas aren't paying attention to that we really need to drive it? Because there's some obvious ones, right? You guys have already said them: revenue per hour, revenue per patient. But what do you think the one that when you see it, you see most people aren't looking at that you're having to guide them and teach them and train them on?
Yeah, for me, I would say it's on the cost side of things. People like, it's easy to try and ignore the costs of treatments. So I would say cost per treatment or cost per service is one that often gets ignored or overlooked because I think sometimes you feel like you don't have a lot of control over it, right? Like you're, buying product from whoever it may be. We know the big players in the industry, and then you have your cost of your providers. And it doesn't feel like there's a lot you can do there. So I think that's one that often gets ignored. But that's where, a few percentages in your profit margin makes a big difference at the bottom line. So it is something that's important to pay attention to.
So when you onboard a new client, Nick, and someone you ask them, what they're tracking currently, and you really dive into it, and how do you give them that? How do you get them to understand that this is really important, that we need to be doing these other things and helping them to build those systems?
Yeah, so what we do with our new clients is an initial analysis on their P&L to see if they're sort of in the ballpark of the industry benchmarks that we see. So we'll look at their product costs, and if that's within the range of what we typically see, that's a good first sign. If they're outside of that, then we start to dig in deeper. And it's like, why is maybe it's a service mix issue, maybe it's just your costs are high for whatever reason. So there's digging we can do once we identify some of those things. So that's the big one. And then like provider costs, like what's your payroll costs look like? And usually if that's above 35% of your revenue, like we need to do some investigating as to why it is at that high. I mean, 30% is a pretty typical range we see, but if you're creeping up on 35-40%, like we need to look into that because that probably points back to utilization. Like your utilization is probably too low and you need to get more patients in there. It's probably an indication you're overstaffed in some way.
I see that, Nick. That's such a good point. I see that all the time because providers who've left the medical field or the hospital, they want to match what a provider was getting before, and they want to give them that. They have big hearts, and a lot of times that's why they hire me because I have to come in and fix it because they do have that. People like you are like, okay, we got to get this put together, and I'm the bad guy that has to come in and do that, right? But keeping that 30, I mean, for me, once it gets close to 30, I'm kind of in panic mode, right? Like I'm like, we gotta change some things. So I think you're spot on there. Ben, do you want to add anything to that as far
Yeah.
as most ignored?
Yeah, really going off the utilization piece, it's interesting because we come in from a completely different lens from like an analytics perspective. We're usually not in their like financials right off the get-go, but provider utilization, something that Nick said was super, super important. Like two injectors can look equally busy, but produce totally different margins. So like utilization highlights the white space, the bottlenecks, and then also the inefficiencies that are quietly shrinking that margin that Nick and team are like currently tracking.
That's such a good point. I had someone come to me and on board with me probably a couple months ago, and they were like, I have this rock star injector and I have this rock star esthetician. And, you see their schedule's full and their revenue per hour is trash. Their utilization looks great, but they're not generating the practice any money. And then, of course, Nick, guess what? Their payroll is extremely, inflated, and there's a lot of things that have to change there. But another one that I think is really good is that profit margin perspective, really understanding what your ROI is on your actual services. I onboarded, and I'll get your opinion on this from both perspectives, from analytics to, from the accounting side of it. But when I onboard a client and we start looking at memberships, we start looking at pricing out. I dive into their pricing model, and a lot of times they have no idea why they created it. Right? They just looked at the med spa down the street, or they looked at and they're like, oh, we'll just go with this, but they didn't factor in their actual numbers. So, Nick, at what point do you dive into what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I think it's crucial. It's like those few percentage, like a 5% increase to your pricing is going to be a 5% direct increase to your bottom line. So it's like pricing is so important. And again, what we do is you almost need to back into that in some ways. Like you need to look at what your cost structure is going to be. How much are you going to have to pay providers? What are you paying for product in order to really develop a price and make sure it's profitable? If you don't know those other variables, you don't know if whatever your per unit cost is makes sense, or your treatment cost, however it may be, makes any sense. And that's even more compounded oftentimes when people are selling package services. If you don't know if what your baseline cost is, or what the price should be for a single service, and then you're just throwing a number out there for a package of services, like that may be yeah, it's great to get upfront payment for services and treatments, but on the back end, like if those are now not profitable, like that's not ideal either.
And now if they're using gift cards because it's Black Friday season, right? And now you're giving them a
Right.
bunch of free money on their gift card, and then they're using it on your package, and you're actually paying them to get services. From an analytics standpoint, Ben, what do you see when it comes to like looking at pricing of services, packages, memberships?
Yeah. Similar to like what Nick has seen is most of the spas haven't put a ton of like thought into the pricing. Not to say not everyone's doing that, but like they benchmark themselves against the med spa up the street, like, oh, their pricing's X, so we should probably be around there. But really when you dig into like the why they price it, that's where you can like that 5% increase that Nick mentioned can be a huge increase in your revenue year over year if you just simply increase your price 5%. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think one other thing to add before we move on from that is to like, there's obviously a lot of competition in this industry. There's new med spas popping up everywhere. And if, a new med spa pops up down the street from you, like you don't want to necessarily be losing people because of price, right? Like that's your initial instinct, but that's not always the case. Like if they're undercutting prices, there's probably a flaw in their business model that's not going to allow them to be successful long term. So it's important to price and think about that with the long game in mind. You can always run promotions, you can always do different things to incentivize people to come in, but you don't want your base pricing to put you in, to be set up for failure. Like you want to set yourself up for success, and that's a really important component to it.
I love that. That's really, really important because, I see it a lot when they add a membership and they already have their pricing structure built out. And then they add that lower discount for the membership. They're actually pricing themselves out of business by generating where membership should actually, help grow and sustain and retain their clientele. So this pushes me right into our next questions. How should owners measure acquisition versus retention? Right? Because those are two totally different things. And I'll let Ben, I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So really acquisition in its simplest form is how many new patients came in the door and what did it cost to get them booked? And then what did they spend? And then retention, simply put, is did they come back? How quickly and what was their lifetime value? And acquisition tells you if you're attracting the right people, and simply put, retention tells you if they actually liked their experience that they had at your spa.
Ben, do you have any additional things to add? Because I look at it as acquisition, retention equals a healthy med spa, right?
Yeah.
Having those two married together, like it's harmony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd agree as well. And I think there's often acquisition cost is something you're looking at, right? Per new patient. But retention is really, they're already in the door. That's on you and your team, right? There shouldn't really be any additional cost to retention. That's about delivering a good service and, having your team trained on the sales side to make sure they're rebooking, they're offering them treatment plans or encouraging them to, upselling opportunities when they arise. Make sure you're taking advantage of those, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
And
consultation playbook.
To add to Nick's point, something on more of like the negative side is when you're noticing like you have a retention problem, something that you can look at is a spike in those one and done visits. So like if half of your new patients are not returning, something in the experience or the treatment plan isn't fully landing with those patients that are coming into your practice.
If I'm looking at when I first come in, acquisition, right? A lot of people, I just want more patients. I just want more patients, right? They're willing to spend the money. They're willing to drive that utilization, like you were saying, Nick. But that costs money, right? That's how much is your cost per lead. Look, understanding that is part of your pricing model too. So I'm going to throw a curveball here and bring up something else when you look at pay. When we're talking about inflated payroll and going back to that for a second, when you're looking at your marketing spend and what it costs to actually get clients in the door and the cost of that, do you pay? What is your recommendation? Do you pay on that acquisition, or do you pay on just your COGS, or do you factor all of that plus your expenses in when you're looking at like that pay compensation structure? That's a good one too, because that inflates payroll.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think oftentimes it's not necessarily the provider, like the provider doesn't have a lot of control over the new patient lead generation component of it. So I feel like it's hard to tie compensation to that necessarily, but I think the retention is an important one that can definitely get connected to the provider, especially, and also rebooking rate. Like what I like to see our clients doing is have a number of measurable KPIs at the provider level that affects their compensation. So you have certain baselines or goals to be hitting, and that's tied to like a quarterly bonus. So that's usually what I would recommend is the best way to do it. Also, state to state, there are legal issues with like just straight commission plans
Yep.
or commission. So that's another thing to make sure you're aware of. It's better to do it structured as goals and a bonus if
Bonus
you
based
meet
on
them.
goals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be my thoughts on it.
I love that. Okay, next question we'll go through. I think we touched on all of those, but what's the simplest way to evaluate your service mix performance, guys? So let's go over. Nick, we'll go right to you for this. When we look at, what we should be offering in our clinic.
Yeah, I think I'm always of the opinion less is more. Like you want to make sure you're confident with the services you're offering, versus providing everything under the sun and not specializing in any certain area. So once you know what services you want to offer, evaluating them, it's important to look at that margin by different service lines. So factoring in like your direct costs and your cost of, product materials to provide those services. And then it's really a factor of determining which ones make the most sense for your business and your goals. I mean, injectables are obviously extremely popular. Like that's where you're going to have the most demand in a lot of cases. But, is that the most profitable? Maybe, maybe not. Like there may be different, types of service that are the best mix to focus on. And, the other thing to consider is the amount of time a service takes, how much of your capacity that utilizes, and then the margin based off of that as well, factoring the time in.
Yeah.
And Ben, the what are you seeing in the analytics part of that across the country right now with the different service mix that we're seeing?
Yeah, really to reiterate kind of what Nick was saying, it's like when you need to look at your margin per room per hour, not just your like revenue per service. So for example, a $300 service that takes 30 minutes can in theory be more profitable than a $500 service that takes 75 minutes. So that shift changes how you use your rooms and then also changes how you schedule out patients and stuff in your practice.
When you understand that as a manager or owner, then you can plan and create and drive that revenue when you have that information.
Yes,
That's so
exactly.
true. That's so true. Okay, where do you see the biggest revenue links inside med spas? I know I have my preferences, but Ben, Nick, who wants to go first on this one? But what is the biggest revenue leak that you can see right out of the gate?
Yeah, I can jump in first. So I feel like I've seen the same few really show up in most of the practices we're working with. So one is like that white space on your schedule where there's just empty time slots from a scheduling perspective. Then another area is poor rebooking habits. And then the third one would be marketing optimized for leads instead of just booked visits. So most med spas don't need more leads; they just need better follow through from what I've seen.
I would agree. Nick, what do
Yeah.
you see?
Yeah, I agree with those. And I think the other one for me that I always see is discounts, where,
Preach.
I mean, yeah, that's the biggest. I mean, I think that's probably the most common. It's a quick one to spot too. When you look in your EMR or look at the financials, those can be significant. And it's a easy trap to fall into, offering a lot of discounts or promotions, things like that. But when you actually start to look at that as a percent of your revenue, I mean, that's an easy place where revenue starts to leak pretty quickly.
That's a huge, huge one, guys. I'm not a fan of discounts. I think this industry took this turn of just accepting it and just discounting, discounting, discounting,
Yeah,
and it was a way to almost compete. I hear that all the time. Well, this is their pricing, and again, it goes back to looking, Ben, like you said early, at setting up based on what other businesses and what you said, Nick, about understanding who you are, but creating those added value versus discounts, right? Like where can we create that, and then not compromising who we are in order to get where we want, because ultimately you're going to discount yourself right out of business, right?
for sure.
I had a client that was letting her entire staff just discount based on what they thought was best for the client just to close. And when we ran their numbers, when I onboarded, did their financial audit, like, what you were saying, Nick, it was like an easy win for me all day. Let's just cut this out, no more discounts, and let's clean up our systems. And, that revenue generated really fast. That was a huge red flag. And
Yep.
so now I'm going to jump into other red flags. Nick, what do you see are some of the biggest financial red flags outside of discounts that maybe, that if you're running your reports and you're looking at your numbers, these are things you should be focused on? I know we've already talked about a few, but maybe we could expand on some others.
Yeah, a couple I'll hit, which we've already touched on, are, payroll as a percent of revenue is a big one for me, and then gross profit margin are the two, like, biggest ones we key in on early on. The other side is cash flow. So this is more of a balance sheet thing oftentimes. Like, you may be profitable on your P&L, but you're not showing positive cash flow. And so what's the reason behind that? So there could be a few things. And one of the big ones often is debt. So how much debt is on the books, and what is that, what does that monthly cost to you in your business? I think that's a trap people fall into, is buying lasers, multiple lasers, the newest equipment. And I think, yes, there's a need for it in some cases, in many cases, but oftentimes it's for the wrong reasons, or because you think you need to keep up with the spa in town, the other spa in town, or the one down the street. And I think there's some truth to that in some ways, but it's also can be done at your own financial detriment. So that's a big one, where there's a red flag of, like, there's way too much debt on the books for the profit being generated. So that's one big area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to add to what we talked about earlier is rising labor costs without rising like revenue per hour per provider. Another area is like refunds and adjustments creeping up towards the end of the year, heavy discounting, which I know we kind of talked about, and then service lines where the margins are falling, but even though the visits are up. And something we've seen from an analytics perspective is like, even if you're busy, but you're not profitable, usually the issue's somewhere in one of those areas, from our perspective.
Yeah, agreed. Don't be in competition with anyone but yourself, right? If you're in competition with yourself and you're looking at your numbers and your data, that drives your decisions, right? And then you can slowly get to where you want to go. And like you said, Nick, it's the long game. Those financial red flags in my experience, which is, why we do those financial audits and we're constantly looking at our numbers, because it's normally operational red flag, right? In disguise a lot of the times. Okay. What are your top practices? What are your top steps that practices can do before December 31st? So Nick, I'll let you lead this one. What do you think to protect their profit? This is a big one right now for everybody as we close out Q4.
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of put on my tax hat for a minute here and talk about that. But I think there's two different strategies here. It's like, yes, you want to make sure you're optimizing profitability. From as we approach year end, though, taxes are always a concern and something you want to start thinking about. So, I always say, like, you want to have a problem of paying taxes because that means you were profitable for the year. With that said, you want to be able to minimize that as much as possible and pay the least amount of tax that you need to. So Some easy things to make sure you're doing as a business owner is make sure you're maxing out retirement contributions or making retirement contributions before year end. If you have purchased new equipment or are planning to before the end of the year, that's a great opportunity to take depreciation deductions and minimize your tax in that way. That's not always the best way to go. Like it sometimes makes sense to depreciate over 5 years versus taking it all in the year you buy it. So there is some analysis to do there versus just saying, okay, I need to buy a quick piece of equipment to wipe out my profit right now. That's not always the way to go. And then, as you approach year end, making sure your inventory, you have a good handle on that. Depending on if you're a cash basis or accrual taxpayer, timing your inventory purchases is important, and also doing a good inventory account. I mean, that should be part of your, weekly or monthly processes anyways, but as you approach year end, make sure you have a good inventory count so you can make sure you're maximizing any deductions on that side of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, go ahead, Ben.
I'll say to add to that, kind of putting on a CPA hat for a second, is really audit those prepaid balances and then your unused packages. Then going off the discounting stuff we were talking about, tighten those discounts and then review the stuff you've written off. Then also push memberships towards the end of the year. And then something we always recommend is working closely with your CPA on timing out those expenses like Nick was talking about, because small adjustments before year end can sometimes save a lot in April.
Yeah, I like to do, agree. I like to do a membership push always in January. And with that becomes like our adjusted pricing, right? Because if we're not looking at, our cost increases and then doing those price adjustments, a lot of times that becomes a huge problem for us throughout the year, right? As well. So, at the end of the year, I love to jump in, do a big membership push, but also a pricing adjustment to make sure that we are able to be profitable. Again, that sets us up for success too with 2026 and understanding, what services are going to bring us the most ROI. So I love all of that. Let's look at if your med spa could fix one thing this quarter to increase profit, what would you recommend? One thing, Ben.
I would say rebooking. I feel like I've harped on this a lot this call, but if you can get rebooking right, it feels like everything stabilizes because that's future revenue, future provider utilization, and even retention. Even small improvement in that area can have a huge impact on your numbers.
Nick, what's your one fix if you could only choose one?
Mine would be utilization, and especially this quarter, Q4 is often a pretty big quarter, busy quarter for med spas. So this is a really good indicator of if your capacity is at a good place. Like, are you in alignment with your team size, with the demand, with your revenue coming in? If your utilization rate is too low, there's probably an indication there that you need to make some bigger picture changes. So I think that's the one I would try and dial in this quarter if I only had to pick one.
I like both of those, but I also like our treatment plan and understanding our, Black Friday specials, end of year deals. What does that look like? What is the girl math? Putting the bigger picture together, setting themselves up for success. So I'm going to say making sure that we understand our pathways when a client walks in to maximize every opportunity so that we're not missing out. If someone takes, I always say, I'm the ideal patient for all of your clients, by the way. Like I'm the ideal patient. I want it all, give it to me. But if I leave my house where I sit and work all the time to drive to your clinic, to sit in your chair, to do a consultation, I want something. And if I leave there with just one thing or I leave there not getting anything, that's a huge problem, right? Because most of the people are me. I'm going to go on a limb. So I'm going to go with treatment plans and making sure that your team understands the pathways, the scripting, and like what the bigger picture is so that, this is another thing I always say, guys, if somebody walks in your clinic and you said you could have everything for free, what do you not want?
Yeah.
How many people would say, oh, I just want this one thing? Not anybody. They want it all, right? So I think giving them that opportunity. Okay. So what trend, Ben, this is to you. What trend do you think is going to impact med spas the most heading into 2026?
Yeah, it's really similar to what we've talked about this whole time. It's that rising labor cost paired with rising competition. Because as Nick mentioned, there's a ton of med spas popping up really across the United States. And the practices that focus on provider and room productivity, not just their revenue, I really feel like they will win in 2026.
Nick, what do you think the biggest impact med spas will have heading into the new year?
Yeah, I think similar. It's increased competition and cost pressure. Making sure, like you mentioned earlier, Abby, is your pricing, like doing pricing increases on a regular schedule is really important to keep up with those rising costs. So, I mean, the other macro impact is obviously economic uncertainty. That's always a question mark, right? So, is there any pressure just from the macro on the industry as a whole? Um, so I think those are the big questions leading in, and it's really just preparing yourself for it by making sure your pricing's right, and what you're offering is setting you up for success, regardless of the fluctuations. There's always going to be ups and downs every year. It often feels unique year to year, but there's always something. So I think it's just always being prepared and having yourself structured for success.
I'm going to go with AI. I'm going to go with utilizing AI, implementing AI. If any of you here know me or you're watching this and you know me, you know I'm obsessed with AI. And I know that you guys are AI driven too with operations, but for me, that's the trend I think that's gonna differentiate at MedSpa A from MedSpa B, right? How are you utilizing it? How are you embracing it? How are you looking at it as it? And Nick, of course, you're gonna see this as it impacts your numbers. Again, efficiency equals profitability. So Ben, I'm gonna push that over to you because that's what you do, right? So maybe tell me a little bit about how you think AI is gonna drive this trend that I so think is gonna be what helps my clients just
Yeah.
succeed and excel.
Yeah, no, for us, seeing practices that adopt like that or really lean into the AI age, it's really just one, a time saver. In some cases, we've seen even Inside X, for example, it saved a VP of finance 20 hours a week on his financial reporting. And in another case, the CEO is tracking marketing spend, it saves her 6 hours a week. So it's just one component is that time saver. So now you as a practice owner can focus on updating your pricing, focus on, hey, I want to open a new location. You can go start scouting new areas for that location. It just gives time back to the owner, which I think is extremely valuable, especially owning a small business in general. Another area of opportunity is becoming an expert in your data. With AI, you can now simply ask your data questions like, hey, like I'm trying to understand my revenue per hour by injector at this specific location. And then you can really start diving into your data without writing like a line of code, which again ties back to like that time saving capability as well.
And you're talking about how you utilize your dashboard, your AI dashboard to
Yeah,
do the analytics for your clients. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a non-negotiable for me, right? It's just it's going to help us meet expectations that we need and help drive our team members to be like, I want to create 10 of you with it, and utilize it. And that, Nick, will help us do what? Get our payroll percentages down, right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to jump into so when we were talking about injectors, I think was it you, Ben, that mentioned this that if you have two injectors, what really drives those profit margins. I know we spoke about utilization, but let's talk a little bit more about revenue per invoice, right? New client acquisition, and when they're front end revenue. Because like when I look at marketing and I look at marketing spend, I always look at that front end revenue.
Yeah.
I know it's the life of the client, but if we're truly driving data driven decisions, it's like how are we maximizing that first visit? So when you see injector A versus injector B, what are those different margins that you really focus on through an analytical perspective?
Yeah. Really, like what it boils down to is the same schedule does not mean the same profit, especially when you're comparing injector A and versus B. It can be tied to different product usage, different service mix, different treatment times, and even different rebooking habits. They all affect the margin for those injectors. And you can easily see that within like Inside X as an analytics solution. Again, ties back to like your AI point where you can ask this question. You're like, hey, why is injector A different than injector B? And then AI also helps you step through the problem and reach an answer.
Nick, when you look and dive into the numbers, are you specifically diving into different providers? Are you looking at the numbers as a whole? Like, what do you do at Lagorian? Like, how do you work with your clients in that way?
Yeah, we do both things. Often it's starting at the macro and looking at the financials as a whole to make sure you're in alignment. And then it's digging into those issues, which often leads to going at the provider level, looking at their, production, revenue, utilization by provider, and then figuring out where there's gaps. Because, like you just said, you could have the revenue numbers be identical from one provider to the next, but that doesn't mean they're both the same, level of profit or their lifetime value of their clients is the same. Like you could have someone who's great at rebooking and upselling and putting treatment plans together. So they're generating a lot more value to your business than one who's just, you know, providing the services and moving on from there, So I think that's a big thing. It's you need that data to be able to pinpoint these issues or identify them. So that's really what's super important about having that access to those numbers is allowing you to interpret them and understand them and then make decisions from them.
And that's something at Lagor you guys do. You break down and you're looking
Yep.
at their payroll versus their output and all of that.
We do, yeah. So a lot of our clients where we're doing the fractional CFO support as well, we're doing the bookkeeping, handling that piece, but then we're providing them reports to give those trends, follow those trends throughout the year, month to month, so you can see where there's increases, decreases, who's performing well, who's not, or who you need to, coach in a different way. Because oftentimes it's like these are things that just aren't even identified. You may not even realize it's an opportunity to that one provider is doing something different than another, and just a little coaching may push them in the right direction. So it's all about that. It's about tracking. It's about noticing the trends and then determining what actions to take from there. So that's where we can help, with that. And it's like the KPI piece is important, but you need the financial piece as well to see that big picture. They need to coexist, I guess. So being able to pull it all into one dashboard or one, KPI results sheet is super helpful.
That's what I was just going to say, Ben. I was going to throw it to you because looking at like when you think about your QuickBooks or your account versus your EMR and like all of your reporting and putting those together, it's kind of like a perfect. So really understanding the numbers not just from a reporting standpoint, but a comparison model. So
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we especially like within our own onboarding process, we usually recommend the practice starts with just their EMR and then they quickly pull in their QuickBooks because that's usually where their next question is probably coming from. And then we've seen practices pull in their marketing platforms and then it always boils down to like their HR platform is like usually the last one that they'll integrate with. So think like Gusto or whatever people are using in this space. And just being able to tie them all together is super, super valuable as a practice owner because again, your time is limited and it just helps alleviate that time suck of like, hey, I need to pull 10 different reports or I don't even know what I'm looking for in some cases. So now I'm just pulling almost random reports trying to see if this solves my question. But again, ties back to like that AI component that we were talking about. The AI can help coach you through that step of like, hey, here's the best place for you to pull report one. Here's the best place for you to pull report two, because most people that use our platform end up going back to their like EMR or like their QuickBooks and then pulling a very targeted report. So like it makes it much quicker for them.
I remember when I was managing my first med spa, I would take one Monday a month, and I would go in, pull all the reports, do all the payroll, do all the numbers, do all my, like spend hours on the spreadsheet. And it was, I couldn't do it daily, right? And then I was trying to do it daily. And so having a platform like yours back in the day, and I'm dated, right? I'm a dinosaur. So back in the day would have just been like heaven to me. So I love that. All right, I have a couple questions from our chat. And if you guys at this point, we've got about 15 more minutes. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to drop those in the chat. But I do have one. And Ben, this is going to be, or no, Nick, this is going to be for you. Are things like SaaS subscriptions eligible for tax code section 179? And is it possible to pay for the year or two all at once to take advantage of that before the end of the year?
Yeah, so they would not generally, like a SaaS makes me think off the shelf software. So in most of the time that is not 179. 179 is a bonus depreciation for equipment, or you can take that deduction for depreciation all in the year you purchased it, so 100% of that cost. With subscriptions, if you're a cash basis taxpayer and you prepay those, that deduction will happen in the year you pay it. So if you pay a yearly subscription in December, you're going to get that deduction this year, versus if you're paying it monthly, it's going to be split of when that cash leaves. So that's the simplest way to sort of break it down. Depending on your situation, the answer may be slightly different, but generally that's the case there.
And then your recommendation, just case by case for everyone,
Yeah,
or
it's case by case. I mean, it's like, if you take the deduction now, then you're not getting it next year, or you have to do the same thing next year. So it's a case by case. It's a planning thing where you can, if you need more deductions this year, if you have a higher profit, then yeah, go for it. Take that deduction now, and benefit from it. Otherwise, if you expect next year's going to be better, save it for next year. So.
That's good. That's good. Okay. And then Nick, do you see Inside X empowering practices that you work with? Does it make it more tangible as you coach them to be more profitable? If you had, the dashboard that, Ben was talking about, how could you see that implemented with your clients?
Yeah, 100%. And I think what Ben said earlier, like having that data with like easy access to knowing what those key numbers and metrics are, I think that's the biggest thing. Like the hardest part is getting accurate data. Like once you have the data, then you can make a decision based off of that. So being able to quickly and easily consolidate data from multiple places is the best part of it. And I think that's the biggest benefit, is just like, okay, I know this trend I'm going to easily be able to track over time because it's all getting pulled in there. Again, it's all dependent on the quality of the data coming into it, of course, right? So you got to make sure your EMR, your QuickBooks, your bookkeeping is all up to date and accurate. But with that being said, like being able to consolidate it is going to make it so much easier, from the clinic owner, for the operator, and for, myself as, an accountant, coach, CPA, whatever, like to say, this is what your data is telling you. These are the moves you need to make.
Well, I know this is going to go to both of you, but straight to you, Nick. How do you know if the data is accurate? Right? Like I work with lots of EMRs that, the reporting is absolutely off, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not accurate. And it's not necessarily the EMR. We know there's no perfect one, right? There's a lot of great ones out there. But, when you're looking at that and you need to optimize that, how do you even know if it's accurate? What could you tell someone who's diving into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem for sure, and it's making sure your setup initially with whatever EMR you're using is done well. And from our side, I mean, working with an expert who's familiar with the industry and these systems is really helpful, because we've seen, especially the more popular EMRs, how they connect, or how they work with your QuickBooks and the financial output. So we can often spot if there's an issue with, from what we're seeing coming through QuickBooks, is that lining up with the reports from your EMR? Are your sales reports, do they match up with the revenue coming in? Because oftentimes there's an issue with, revenue coming in, or memberships, or credits, account credits, things like that, where the way it's set up in the EMR may not be accurate, and we can see that in the deposits coming in. So that's another, I mean, important factor of making sure who you're working with knows the industry. I think that's important.
Yeah. And this is to you, because from
Yeah.
an analytics point of view, like how do you, how do you spot those
Yeah.
areas where you're like, wow, you really need to, the data is definitely not accurate.
Yeah, so something we've invested heavily in, especially like when you have an AI component, you have to invest in the data accuracy piece. So a big part of what InsideX does is it handles that data accuracy for you. So MedSpas obviously use multiple systems, EMR, scheduling, payments, accounting softwares, and they most of the time do not structure the data the same way. So what InsideX can automatically do is it validates incoming data for missing fields or inconsistencies. It'll clean and standardize like the services and provider names. And then it also reconciles revenue between booking, EMR, and accounting. And then it aligns like payments, packages, memberships, and tips to like the correct visit. And it also flags like unusual patterns in a sense, so nothing slips by. And that's all happening behind the scenes. Like it's not in your like actual dashboard, but it's just happening as the data is flowing over. So instead of trying to stitch everything together manually, the end result is you get a clean, reconciled data every morning without having to really touch a spreadsheet. So that's something we've invested heavily in on our
But we
side.
love spreadsheets, guys. We love them. Do you miss them yet? Because I'm not using them as much as I used to. Something else that I was going to say. So at your dashboard, Ben, that's going to flag and alert you based on your AI. So if someone isn't sure, they can get in with, as they access and set up their dashboard, you're gonna be able to alert them and move them right through that. So it's kind of going to be
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And something that we're still working through, just as like an industry norm, is a big disconnect we've seen is like in the EMR, everything's super granular, but then what people are booking as an expense in QuickBooks isn't as granular as it should be, which is again is like kind of a behavior change in this space. And I'm sure Nick has ran into that being a CPA. So that's something that we're again working towards and just changing behavior.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. And so what I'd like to kind of do is hand it over. I'll let each one of us kind of go through and close out on, our thoughts. And obviously, I know people are going to want to know how to reach you and how they can book a strategy session with you guys, or how to get the dashboard, or how, Nick, to get your team to help them understand their, what they truly need on that side of it. So I think what I'll do is I'd like you to give one piece of advice that every owner should walk away with. Today, Nick, I'll start with you, and then anything else that you might want to share with our participants.
Yeah, I guess my one piece is, everyone's at a different place with how hands-on they are with their numbers and KPIs and financials. So my one takeaway would be make sure, you have a solid understanding of your profit and loss report and your gross profit margin as like a first starting point. Like make sure you go through your P&L and take the time this month to look at October's financials and make sure you have a good understanding of that. Look at your year to date, look at your month in isolation. And that would be my first sort of challenge as far as like starting down this road of making sure you can utilize your numbers and KPIs. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to help anyone who's on the call or listening to the recording in the future. You can reach me at ligoricpa.com is our website. And I'll put my email as well in the chat, but we'll have a form up there where you can fill that out and get in touch. We also have some resources up which you can get through our website on our link tree, and some templates that you can download for free from us. So feel free to reach out. Happy to have a conversation with anybody and talk about KPIs, what metrics are important to you, or what would be helpful. Any sort of help, whether it's tax, accounting, fractional CFO support that we can provide.
You guys, Nick's the best. So if you really need, you need the person to step in and take in on that aspect of your business. If you're in aesthetics, like he's the guy to go to for sure. So make sure you follow, like, comment on all of his social media. And then also we'll be sending out a recap of this, and this will be attached at Pink Sky Insight and Liguori as well. So Ben, what's your big takeaway that you want people to take away from this, and as they move into 2026, and then of course, how they can reach you and anything else that you'll be doing?
Yeah, for us, analytics is a lot of the times a new spend category for med spa owners. So our piece of advice is don't chase more data, chase clarity. So pick 5 KPIs that drive revenue and then make every decision through those 5 different lenses. I think chunking it out as you get more comfortable in like the world of data analytics is super helpful as a med spa owner, because again, your hair's on fire, you own a small business. I understand there's a lot going into those day to day. And then to reach us, I put my email in the chat. We also do free trials if you're interested in testing out our dashboard, and also open to hopping on the phone, running through an actual sales demo as well, which you can book that through our website. And I can put my Calendly link in the chat as well.
Guys, Ben's dashboard is amazing. I've already implemented it with several of my clients. We're using it, implementing it into our SOPs, our systems, our daily tracking. It's part of my non-negotiables when working and diving in deep with my clients. At Pink Sky Partner Success, that's what we do here. We look at the bigger picture. We fill in the gaps. We fill in the holes. When you need Liguori, when you need Insight X, we're the ones that are going to take that and place you with the right? As Anthony, my peanut butter and jelly partners likes to say, is that if you have an issue at Pink Sky, we have a tissue. And we're working with the best of the best in the industry. I'm really happy to be on here with these guys. If you would like to learn more about how you can book a strategy session, or how you can learn more, whether it's EMR optimization, understanding your numbers, setting goals for your team, looking at profitability, the three of us have you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We will be sending out a replay of this to all of our participants here today. There will be additional information, how to contact us. You'll find us at shows and conferences across the country in 2026. And we look forward to seeing all of you in the new year. So finish strong. Make sure that you understand that you make sure that you're tracking the right KPIs, right? The right ones. Use your numbers to make data-driven decisions. And thank you for being here, and go take action now. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you both.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.